It was one of those long evenings that seemed to drag forever. The city was busy as usual, cars rushing past, people hurrying to get home, and the sound of rain starting to fall softly over the pavement. He walked quietly along the street, his worn-out shoes splashing through shallow puddles. Work had been tiring that day, and all he wanted was to get home, eat a warm meal, and rest. He wasn't the type to notice every person on the street. Like most people, he was used to seeing beggars, street musicians, or people asking for help. Life in the city taught you to keep walking, to not get involved too much. But that evening felt different. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was the way the air felt heavy. But something made him look up as he passed the bus stop near the corner of the street. There, sitting on the cold concrete, was a man who looked completely defeated. His clothes were torn and soaked, his hands trembling as he held a small cardboard sign that read, "Hungry and cold. Please help." He wasn't shouting or begging loudly. He just sat there quietly looking down as if he had already given up on anyone noticing him. People kept passing by. Some glanced at him for a second before turning their heads. Others just walked faster, pretending not to see. The man stood there for a moment watching. Something inside him stirred, maybe pity, maybe empathy, maybe a memory. For a moment he imagined himself in that stranger's place. He thought about how easy it was for life to take everything away. One bad turn, one mistake, one illness, and everything could fall apart. He looked down at the wallet in his pocket. He didn't have much on him, just enough for dinner and maybe a bus ticket. Still, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. He took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Hey," he said gently. The stranger looked up, his eyes dull but kind. "Are you all right?" The man nodded slowly, almost embarrassed. "Just hungry," he whispered. His voice was weak, the kind that told stories without needing many words. "Come on," he said, motioning toward a small diner across the street. "Let's get you something to eat." The stranger looked surprised. "You don't have to," he said softly, his voice shaky. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." They walked together across the street. The diner was warm and smelled of fresh coffee and grilled food. The waitress looked at them for a second, probably wondering about the soaked man in torn clothes, but she didn't say anything. They found a corner booth, and he told the stranger to order whatever he wanted. At first, the stranger hesitated, staring at the menu like it was something unfamiliar. Then, after a little push, he ordered a simple meal, soup, bread, and tea. When the food arrived, he ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. Watching him, the man felt a strange ache in his chest. It wasn't sadness exactly, but something close to it. A quiet realization that sometimes kindness costs so little yet means so much. They sat in silence for a while. The rain outside turned heavier, tapping gently against the diner's window. Finally, the man asked, "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" The stranger looked up, his eyes reflecting both shame and exhaustion. "I used to have a job," he said. "Worked in construction. Then I got injured, couldn't work for months. Bills piled up, rent was overdue, and one day I just lost it all." He paused, looking at his trembling hands. "It's been a rough year. Some nights I sleep at the shelter, some nights outside. I try to find work, but people don't trust someone who looks like me anymore." There was a long silence. The man didn't know what to say. He wanted to fix it somehow, to tell him things would get better. But those words felt empty. Instead, he said, "You know, everyone needs a hand sometimes. You just haven't met the right person yet." The stranger gave a faint smile. "Maybe I just did," he said quietly. The man smiled too. They talked for a bit longer. About small things, about how the city changed, about simple memories. The stranger's voice grew steadier as he spoke, his face softening with every word. It was like he had been silent for so long that finally being heard gave him life again. When the meal was over, the man paid the bill. The stranger looked down at the table, clearly feeling guilty. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "I don't even have anything to give." "You don't have to," the man replied. "Just promise me something. When you're in a better place, help someone else." "That's enough." The stranger nodded slowly. "I will. I promise." As they stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The streetlights shimmered on the wet road, and the air smelled clean and calm. The man reached into his wallet again and took out a few folded bills. "Here," he said, handing them over. "Get a place to sleep tonight. Somewhere warm." The stranger hesitated, his hands shaking as he accepted the money. "You've done more than enough," he said. "But thank you. Really, thank you." The man smiled and patted his shoulder. "Take care of yourself." They parted ways there under the soft glow of the streetlight. The stranger walked down the street, disappearing into the misty night, and the man turned toward home. He didn't think much of it after that. It felt good to help, but he didn't expect anything to come of it. To him, it was just a small act, something any decent person should do. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air felt lighter, his steps easier. Maybe it was just the relief of doing something right for once, something unselfish. Or maybe deep down it was the beginning of something much bigger, a story that neither of them could have imagined that night. When he reached home, he made some tea and sat quietly by the window. The rain had stopped completely now, and the city lights glimmered like tiny stars scattered across the streets. He thought about the stranger again, where he might be, whether he found shelter, whether he was okay. A small voice in his heart hoped that he would be. The next morning, life went on as usual. Work, errands, the usual routine. But something subtle had shifted in him. He found himself noticing people more. The security guard who always stood outside the office, the cleaner who worked late, the old woman selling flowers near the train station. He realized how many people were struggling silently, just like the man he had met. That evening, as he left work, he passed by the same bus stop again. The spot where the stranger had sat was empty, but there was something there. The small cardboard sign, now damp from the rain, leaning against the bench. He picked it up, looked at the faded words, and smiled faintly. He folded it gently and slipped it into his bag. Maybe it was just a piece of cardboard, but to him, it was a reminder of something real. That a moment of kindness can create a spark in the darkest of nights. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night stayed with him. He didn't see the stranger again, but every now and then when he passed that bus stop, he slowed down a little, half expecting to see a familiar face. He never did, but he never stopped hoping. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of kindness had already set something in motion, a ripple that would soon return to him in ways he could never predict. For now, though, he was just a man who had followed his heart one rainy evening, not knowing that helping a poor stranger would soon change everything in his life. The next few days went by quietly, work, home, sleep, repeat in the usual rhythm of his life. But the memory of that evening at the diner kept returning to his mind. Every time he passed the bus stop where he first saw the stranger, he found himself slowing down, half expecting to see him again. The cardboard sign was gone now, and the bench was empty most of the time. Yet something about that spot reminded him of that night. The look of gratitude in the stranger's eyes, and the way he had smiled when he promised to help someone else someday. He didn't think he would ever see him again. It had felt like one of those passing moments in life, something small and kind, meaningful but temporary. Still, a week later, while walking home from work, he saw a familiar figure near a small convenience store. The man looked cleaner now, wearing a donated jacket and holding a plastic bag of food. He recognized him instantly. "Hey," he called out with a smile. The stranger turned, surprised, and then smiled back. "Oh, it's you," he said softly, almost relieved. "I didn't think I'd see you again." They shook hands, and for a brief moment it felt like two old friends meeting after a long time. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Better," the stranger said, "thanks to you. That money you gave me helped me get a few nights at the shelter. I've been going to the job center every morning trying to find something steady." "That's good," he said with genuine happiness. "You're really trying, huh?" "I have to," the stranger said with a faint smile. "Can't stay down forever." They talked for a few minutes on the sidewalk. The stranger mentioned how hard it was to get hired when you didn't have a proper address or clean clothes. "People don't look at you the same," he said. "They see someone dirty and think that's who you are. But I used to work hard, I really did. I just got unlucky." Hearing that, the man felt a deep pull inside him. He had always believed people deserved second chances, but it was different seeing it this close. He thought about how many times he had ignored others in the past, how easy it was to assume someone's story without knowing it. "Listen," he said after a pause, "there's this small warehouse near my office. I know the manager there. They sometimes need extra hands for packaging work. It's not much, but maybe I can talk to someone for you." The stranger looked at him as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "You'd really do that?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Of course, he said. You're trying. That's what matters. The stranger's eyes softened. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly. You already did enough, he smiled. Then let's just say you're giving me a chance to do something good again. They parted ways, with a promise. He would speak to the warehouse manager the next day and see if there was any opening. The following morning, true to his word, he stopped by the warehouse before work. The manager, a middle-aged man he knew through a friend, was busy but kind enough to listen. He explained the situation, that there was someone he wanted to recommend, someone willing to work hard. The manager hesitated at first, saying they usually required proper documents and references, but finally agreed to give it a try for a few days. That evening, when he found the stranger again near the same spot, he shared the news. They'll give you a trial shift tomorrow, he said. It's not permanent yet, but it's a start. The stranger's eyes lit up with hope, the kind of hope that comes after a long time of darkness. I won't waste this chance, he said firmly. I promise, he smiled. I believe you. The next day he stopped by the warehouse during his lunch break. He saw the stranger there, wearing borrowed work gloves, sorting boxes carefully and following directions. He looked tired but determined. The manager nodded approvingly. He's quiet, he said, but he works hard. We'll see how it goes. That small moment filled him with quiet pride. It wasn't about being a hero or doing something grand. It was about seeing another person slowly rebuild their dignity. When their eyes met across the warehouse floor, the stranger gave him a small nod. A silent thank you. Days turned into weeks. The stranger kept the job, working every day without complaint. He saved up enough to rent a small room near the station. He even got a haircut, and though his clothes were still simple, he carried himself differently now, more upright, more confident. Every few days they met after work, sometimes sharing tea at a small roadside stall, talking about life, dreams, and how strange it was that one small meeting could change everything. During one of their talks, the stranger said something that stayed with him. You know, he said, staring at his cup of tea, when you've been invisible for so long, you forget what it feels like to be seen. That night at the diner, you looked at me like I still mattered. That's what gave me the strength to try again. He didn't know what to say. He just smiled and said, You always mattered. You just needed someone to remind you. It wasn't just the stranger who was changing. Something inside him was changing too. He found himself feeling lighter, more aware of people around him. He started greeting the janitor in his office building, tipping the delivery boys properly, and volunteering at the food bank once a week. It wasn't out of guilt or pride. It was because helping someone had shown him how powerful a small act could be. Months passed, and the stranger slowly built a new life. He got promoted to a regular position at the warehouse. The manager often told him, That guy you sent me, he's one of the most reliable workers we've had. Hearing that always brought a quiet smile to his face. One evening, after work, they met again at the same diner where it all began. The stranger looked different now, stronger, more confident, with clear eyes and a warm smile. I wanted to tell you, he said. I got a steady contract. I'm not on trial anymore. That's amazing, he said, truly happy for him. You did it. No, the stranger said, shaking his head. We did it. You believed in me when no one else did. He laughed softly. All I did was buy you dinner. That dinner saved me, the stranger replied seriously. You don't understand. I was ready to give up that night. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. You didn't just feed me. You reminded me that kindness still exists. He sat quietly, letting the words sink in. Sometimes you never realize how much something small can mean to someone else. Before leaving, the stranger pulled something out of his pocket. A small folded paper. What's this? He asked. Just a note, the stranger said, smiling shyly. A reminder that life can change when someone cares enough to notice. He unfolded it later that night when he got home. It was a handwritten message that said, When you helped me, you didn't just change my day, and you changed my life. He sat there for a long time, holding the paper in his hand, feeling a warmth that no money or success could give. That simple line meant more to him than anything else. It was proof that kindness could create something real and lasting. The following days they still saw each other now and then, though less frequently as the stranger grew busier with work. But the bond between them remained. It wasn't about pity anymore, and it was friendship, respect, and shared humanity. One afternoon, as he was heading home, the stranger stopped him and said, "I've been saving up. Once I'm stable, I want to help others like me. Maybe open a small kitchen where people who are struggling can get a free meal. You inspired that idea." He smiled proudly. "That's a wonderful idea. You'll help a lot of people." The stranger looked at him with quiet gratitude. "You gave me hope. Now I want to pass it on." That night, as he walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, he couldn't help but smile. The world suddenly felt a little kinder, a little warmer. He had no idea then that this bond, this simple friendship born from one act of compassion, would one day come back into his life in ways he couldn't imagine. For now, he was just grateful. Grateful that he had stopped that night, that he had listened, and that he had lent a hand to a stranger who had become so much more than that. Life started to take on a new rhythm. Every morning, the man would pass the warehouse on his way to work and glance through the open gate. There he would see the stranger, now wearing the company's uniform, moving boxes, helping others, and talking with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Seeing him like that filled the man with a sense of calm satisfaction. It reminded him that even the smallest good deed could grow into something meaningful. Weeks turned into months. The stranger had settled well into his job. He had made a few friends among the other workers and even saved enough money to rent a small, shared room not far from the warehouse. The man often met him after work for tea or a short walk. Their conversations had changed over time. They no longer spoke about surviving. Now they talked about plans, hopes, and the future. One evening, as the sun set behind the buildings, they sat by the same bench near the bus stop where they had first met. The city buzzed around them, but for a moment the world felt quiet. The stranger said, "You know, sometimes I still wake up thinking I'm on the streets. Then I remember I have a bed, a roof, and a job. I can't believe how different life feels now." The man smiled. "You've earned every bit of it. I only gave you a small push." The stranger shook his head gently. "You gave me more than that. You gave me belief in myself and people. That's something I lost a long time ago." Those words stayed with him. It was strange how one meeting between two strangers could lead to such a deep connection. Their friendship had grown naturally, built not on pity but on mutual respect. The man learned that the stranger had once been a carpenter, skilled with his hands, proud of his craft. "I loved building things," he said once. "There's something peaceful about creating something from nothing." That comment made the man think. He worked in an office where most of his days were spent behind a screen, handling papers, sending emails, and attending meetings. It paid the bills, but it didn't feel meaningful. The stranger's words reminded him of something he had lost too, the sense of doing something that truly mattered. As the weeks went by, people around the man started to notice small changes in him. He seemed more patient, kinder, and more thoughtful. At work, he began helping his younger colleagues with their tasks and stopped rushing through everything. Even his neighbors noticed that he smiled more often now. It was as if his one act of kindness had opened a new part of him, a part that had been asleep for years. One afternoon, his co-worker mentioned a local charity that provided free meals for the homeless every weekend. Without thinking much, he volunteered. That first weekend, as he served plates of food to strangers, he remembered the night he had bought the stranger a warm meal. It felt like coming full circle. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he had seen with his own eyes how far one meal could go. Meanwhile, the stranger continued to make progress. He had been promoted to a senior worker position in the warehouse. He was saving regularly and had even started sending small amounts to his younger sister in another city, helping her with rent. He never forgot where he came from or how quickly life could change. But now, instead of feeling trapped by his past, he used it as motivation. One evening, the stranger invited the man to a small gathering at the warehouse. "It's nothing fancy," he said shyly. "Just some of us getting together to celebrate my first year here." The man gladly accepted. When he arrived, he was greeted warmly by a group of workers laughing and sharing stories. The stranger stood among them, smiling proudly. Seeing him there, surrounded by friends, looking strong and content, was a sight that filled the man's heart with joy. During the small celebration, one of the workers came up to the man and said, "You're the one who brought him here, right? He told us how you helped him. He's one of the best people we've got." The man felt a bit embarrassed but smiled. "He did all the hard work," he replied. "I just gave him a start." Later that night, as they walked home, the stranger said, You've changed my life, you know that? But what's funny is I think you've changed too." The man laughed softly. "Maybe I have. I think helping you reminded me of what's really important." From then on, they both started doing small acts of kindness wherever they could. The stranger often bought extra sandwiches on his lunch breaks to give to people living on the streets. The man continued volunteering at the food charity every weekend. Sometimes they teamed up, one cooking, the other serving, finding joy in helping others the way their own story had begun. Their actions didn't go unnoticed. One of the charity workers once said to the man, "You two bring a kind of warmth that people don't forget easily. It's not just what you give. It's the way you make people feel seen." The man smiled at that, thinking back to the first night in the diner, how the stranger had said he felt invisible until someone stopped to notice him. Now that same man was helping others feel visible again. Life had a strange, beautiful way of connecting things. Months passed and both of them grew busier. But even when they couldn't meet often, they stayed in touch. Every time they spoke, their conversations were filled with laughter, stories, and memories. The man had never thought that one moment of compassion would lead to such a lasting friendship. One rainy evening, much like the night they met, the stranger called him. His voice sounded different, excited. "I have news," he said. "Remember when I told you I used to do carpentry? Well, a small furniture shop in town is looking for someone skilled. I went there today after work, showed them some photos of what I used to make, and they want to hire me part-time. If things go well, it could turn into something bigger." "That's incredible," the man said, genuinely thrilled. "You see, all your hard work is paying off." "I couldn't have done it without you," the stranger replied. "You gave me a start when no one else would." The man chuckled softly. "You would have found your way eventually. You just needed someone to remind you that you could." From that day on, the stranger began working at the furniture shop in the evenings after his warehouse shift. He would often show the man pictures of the tables, chairs, and shelves he built. Each piece carried a sense of pride and purpose. "When I build something now," he said once, "it feels like I'm rebuilding my life piece by piece." And he truly was. Bit by bit, he was carving a new future. The man watched with pride as the stranger transformed from someone barely surviving into someone thriving, someone who now helped others the way he had once been helped. But as life tends to go, change was coming again, though neither of them knew it yet. The man's company was preparing for major layoffs due to financial losses. Rumors spread that several departments might shut down. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain about his own future. Still, he tried not to worry too much. He reminded himself of the very advice he had once given, that life could fall apart, but it could also come together in unexpected ways. One night, after a long, stressful day at work, he met the stranger for tea. He didn't mention his job troubles, but somehow the stranger sensed something was wrong. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Everything okay?" The man smiled faintly. "Just work stress. Nothing I can't handle." The stranger looked at him seriously. "You helped me when I had nothing. If you ever need help, I'm here too. Don't forget that." He nodded, touched by the sincerity in those words. He had no idea how much they would mean later on. As they parted ways that night, the man didn't realize that life was about to turn again, that soon he would face challenges of his own. But what neither of them knew was that the kindness he had given years ago would come back to him in a way he never expected. The circle of kindness that started one rainy evening was still turning, waiting for the moment it would complete itself. The evening air was cool, with the faint hum of traffic echoing in the distance as he walked toward the warehouse. It was the first time the stranger had invited him to anything. "It's nothing fancy," the stranger had said. "Just a small gathering for the workers. We're celebrating finishing a big project." When he reached the warehouse, strings of lights hung across the courtyard, and a few tables were set up with snacks and drinks. Music played softly from a small speaker, and laughter filled the air. It was a simple setup, but there was warmth in it, the kind that only comes from people who have worked hard together. The stranger spotted him and waved. He looked different, cleaner, confident, standing taller than before. There was a quiet pride in his eyes that hadn't been there the first time they met. "You made it," he said, walking over with a smile. "Of course," he replied. "I wouldn't miss it." They talked for a while as workers came by, greeting the stranger like an old friend. One of them clapped him on the back and said, "We're lucky to have this guy. He works harder than anyone." The man could see how respected the stranger had become. It wasn't out of pity, and it was genuine admiration. After a while, the stranger introduced him to the warehouse manager. "This is the person I was telling you about," the stranger said. The manager smiled and shook his hand. "You did a good thing," the manager said. "He's one of our best workers now." He smiled modestly. He did all the hard work himself. Later that evening, as everyone sat around chatting, the stranger shared his story with the group, how he had once been homeless, how a small act of kindness had helped him find his way again. The room grew quiet as he spoke. He didn't exaggerate or seek sympathy. He just told the truth, that life can fall apart suddenly, and sometimes all it takes is one person who doesn't look away. When he finished, there was a soft round of applause. A few people wiped their eyes. The man sat there quietly, humbled. He hadn't realized how much that single moment, buying a meal for someone, and had rippled into something much larger. After the gathering ended, the stranger walked him out. The night was still and a faint breeze rustled the trees. "You know," the stranger said, "I used to think my life was over, but now I feel like I'm starting again. And I owe that to you." He shook his head. "No, you owe it to yourself. You didn't give up." The stranger smiled, a deep, genuine smile. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have had the strength if you hadn't seen me that night. You looked at me like I was still worth something." Those words touched him more than he expected. He didn't respond immediately. He just nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. A few weeks later, the stranger called him one evening, his voice filled with excitement. "I've got some news," he said. "Can we meet?" They met at the same diner where their story had started months ago. The smell of coffee and grilled food filled the air as the stranger sat across from him, almost glowing with energy. "I've been saving up," he said, "and I found a small workshop for rent. It's nothing big, but I'm going to start making furniture again." He blinked in surprise. "You're serious?" "Completely," the stranger said with a grin. "I can't keep working at the warehouse forever. I've always wanted to build things again. I figured, why not now?" The man couldn't help but smile. "That's incredible. You really turned your life around." "I couldn't have done it without that night," the stranger said quietly. "You didn't know me, but you helped anyway. I want to carry that forward. I want to build something that reminds people that change is possible." As he listened, the man realized something. Kindness doesn't end where it begins. It passes on quietly from one person to another. Over the next few months, the stranger threw himself into his work. He rented a small space near the edge of town, just big enough for a few tools and a workbench. The man visited often, bringing coffee and supplies. Bit by bit, the stranger built his dream, crafting tables, chairs, and small wooden items that he sold at the weekend market. His hands, once rough from hardship, now shaped wood with care and precision. Each piece he made seemed to tell a story, not just of skill, but of survival. People began to notice his work. Orders trickled in, and soon he was making enough to hire one helper. He named his little business Second Chance Woodworks. When asked about the name, he would smile and say, "Because everyone deserves one." One afternoon, the man visited the workshop to find a small wooden plaque on the wall. It read, "To the person who believed when no one else did." Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a date, the night they had first met at the bus stop. He stood there for a while, staring at it, feeling his eyes sting with emotion. The stranger noticed and said softly, "I wanted to remind myself where it all began." He smiled faintly. "You don't need to thank me anymore." "I know," the stranger replied, "but I'll never forget." Their friendship deepened even more after that. The man would often stop by after work, sitting on an old stool while the stranger sanded down a piece of wood or painted a new design. They talked about everything, and work, life, dreams, regrets. Sometimes they sat in silence, both content just to be there. In those quiet moments, the man realized how much his life had changed too. That one act of kindness had not only saved someone else's life, it had healed something in him as well. He had started volunteering regularly at shelters and mentoring young workers at his job. The emptiness he used to feel was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. It wasn't about being noticed or praised. It was about connection, about remembering that every person carries a story. One evening, as they locked up the workshop, the stranger turned to him and said, "You know, I think I finally understand what people mean when they say life gives you back what you give out." He nodded, smiling softly. It really does. They stood there for a moment, watching the fading sunset paint the sky orange and gold. The stranger looked peaceful, proud, alive, and the man, who had once only intended to buy a stranger a meal, realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes the smallest moments become the ones that change everything. Neither of them could have known it that night at the bus stop, but fate had quietly written their paths together. Two lives forever changed by one act of kindness. The months that followed were full of quiet determination and steady progress. The stranger's little workshop became his world. Each morning, before the sun fully rose, he would unlock the creaky metal door, sweep the floor, and begin working on whatever order was waiting for him. The sound of tools filled the air, the rhythmic hum of a sander, the gentle tapping of nails, the soft scrape of wood against wood. The man visited whenever he could, usually after work with a cup of coffee in hand. He'd sit on a stool, watching the stranger measure, cut, and polish with careful precision. There was something peaceful about it, seeing someone rebuild their life piece by piece, literally crafting a new beginning with their own hands. One evening, as the stranger wiped the sawdust from his hands, he said quietly, "You know, when I first started again, I was afraid, not of failing, but of not being worth the chance you gave me. I didn't want to disappoint you." The man shook his head. "You never could. Look around, but you built all this. You should be proud." The stranger smiled, his eyes soft. "I am, but more than that, I'm grateful. You reminded me that people still care." The workshop slowly started attracting attention. People in the neighborhood loved his handmade furniture. Strong, simple, and beautiful. A local cafe ordered a few custom tables, and soon after, a small restaurant commissioned chairs. Word spread. He began getting more orders than he could handle. To help, he hired a young man from the nearby shelter. "He reminds me of myself," the stranger said. "Lost but trying." Watching that, the man felt a quiet pride swell in his chest. The kindness that had started with one small gesture had now begun to multiply, moving from one person to another, like a spark spreading light. One afternoon, the man received a call. It was the stranger, his voice trembling with emotion. "You need to come by," he said. "There's something I want to show you." When he arrived, he found the workshop freshly painted. The walls gleamed white and the air smelled of new beginnings. But what caught his eye was a beautifully carved wooden sign hanging above the entrance. It read, "The Helping Hand Workshop." Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, "Inspired by one act of kindness." He stood there speechless. "You didn't have to do that," he finally said. The stranger smiled. "I wanted to. Because everything here and every table, every chair, and started with that one night you chose to stop and help." They stood there together for a long moment, the evening light spilling through the doorway. The man didn't know what to say. His throat tightened as he realized how deeply this had changed them both. Months passed and the Helping Hand Workshop became something of a local story. The newspaper wrote a small piece about it, how a once homeless man turned his life around and now helped others do the same. When asked how it all began, the stranger simply said, "Someone believed in me when no one else did." The man read that line in the paper and felt tears form in his eyes. It wasn't fame or attention that moved him. It was knowing that his small act had become a story of hope. Over time, their friendship turned into something like family. They shared birthdays, holidays, and ordinary days filled with laughter and simple conversations. The man often brought his young nephew to the workshop, letting him learn how to hammer nails and sand wood. "You see," he told the boy, "every piece of wood can be shaped into something beautiful if you take your time. People are the same way." The stranger would smile at that, nodding in quiet agreement. Years later, the workshop grew into a proper business. The stranger hired more workers, most of them people who had once been struggling, men and women who needed a second chance just like he did. He treated them with kindness and patience, teaching them not just carpentry but also the dignity of work. One day the man stopped by after a long time. The place was buzzing, machines humming, laughter filling the air. He watched the workers moving with confidence, the stranger walking among them, giving gentle instructions, encouraging words. He seemed happy, truly happy. The stranger noticed him and hurried over, still wearing his work apron. "It's been a while," he said warmly. "I can see you've been busy," the man replied, smiling. "This place looks amazing." The stranger laughed. It's grown faster than I ever imagined, but I'll never forget where it began. He led the man to the back room where a new project was taking shape, a long, beautifully crafted wooden bench. On the top edge, words were carved neatly into the wood. Kindness builds futures. It's for the community park, the stranger said. I wanted to give something back. A place where people can sit and rest. Maybe someone will look at it one day and remember that kindness still exists. The man ran his fingers over the carved words, feeling the smoothness of the polished wood. He smiled softly. It's perfect. They sat together on that unfinished bench, surrounded by the quiet hum of life. For a while, neither spoke. The air was thick with unspoken gratitude, for second chances, for friendship, for the way life can surprise you when you least expect it. As the evening light faded, the man finally said, Do you ever think about that night at the bus stop? The stranger nodded slowly. Every day. It reminds me that sometimes the smallest choices we make end up changing everything. He smiled. I think about it too. I never knew one meal would lead to all this. The stranger looked at him with gentle eyes. That's the thing about kindness, he said. You never see how far it travels, but it always finds a way to come back. They both sat there quietly, watching the sunlight stretch across the workshop floor, golden and soft. Around them, life moved on. Workers talking, wood shavings floating in the air, the smell of varnish mixing with the scent of hope. And in that moment, the man realized something profound, that real change doesn't happen in big dramatic moments. It happens in the quiet ones when someone chooses to care. The stranger had once been a lost soul on a cold night, and now he was a man building dreams for others. The man had once been just another passerby, but now he carried the warmth of purpose wherever he went. As they stood to leave, the stranger turned and said, I hope one day I can do for someone else what you did for me. The man smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. You already are. They walked out together into the calm evening side by side, two people forever connected by one simple truth, that a single act of kindness can change not just one life, but many. The street lights flickered on as they went their separate ways, but both carried the same quiet thought in their hearts, that goodness once shared never truly ends.